So I'm going to introduce this guy. He's become my friend over the past 3 days. The only thing we messed up is his keffiyeh he forgot, and I forgot my socks. Other than that, we're doing okay. But I knew it would be an eventful day after, or eventful 3 days when I first started talking to him on the phone. And then, you know, I forgot. I have to bring my poster that I made up and put it back here. I'll do that after it gets through talking. We made up a big poster for him that I brought up to the airport. And before I met him, a guy was coming down the elevator and he came up to me and said, you must be looking for this guy. And he showed me his business card. And he says, you're going to have a great 3 days with this fellow. And it has turned out that way. And the reason that he's in Connecticut is because we got the idea when Wethersfield, and these people are doing a great job, they brought in the Vietnam traveling wall, and they've also have a cost of freedom display. And when I started going to the meetings, I noticed they went and said, well, look at all the past events that we're going to show really affect our freedom, like the USS Pueblo, which lost 1 person, I believe, the Iran hostage situation, the El Salvador War, the Grenada invasion, USS Stark, and some of them very, very difficult situations, the Panama invasion, USS Cole attack. But I raised my hand, I said, no USS Liberty. And nobody knew. Nobody in that entire room of 30 people ever heard of the USS Liberty. So I went on the internet, and they have a lot of information up there. They have their own webpage. I talked to Mo Shaker.
Yes.
And Mo said, you have to talk to Bryce Lockwood. He's a Marine. I said, he's a Marine. Oh. And when I found out about the Liberty about 15 years ago, but when I found out there was 2 Marines in there, it sparked my interest again, let alone the fact that 34 people died and 174 were killed after being bombed by Israel. So it's not on the cost of freedom. All that other stuff that I just mentioned is. So we thought that, and Bryce said, I would like to come down and try to make people aware of what happened that day. So he's a friend of mine now, I guess forever, and I'm so glad to present him.
We haven't divorced yet.
No, I'm so glad to present him to you. Gunny Sergeant Bryce Lockwood, USMC.
Thank you. 1960s, many of the sub-Saharan African many of the sub-Saharan African colonies had just won their independence from Portugal, Spain, France. And the United States, there was a large Soviet and Cuban influence in those sub-Saharan African countries, very wealthy in natural resources, minerals, gold, silver. So you can understand probably the influence that the Soviets and the Cubans had there. The United States wanted to keep track of what was going on, especially the Soviets with our armies. The USS Liberty was a spy ship. During World War II, she had been a freighter that had been put into mothballs after the war. She was taken out of mothballs and completely reconfigured for intelligence collection. The United States in 1965 spent $26 million in outfitting the Liberty and equipping her for intelligence collection. Among the equipment that we had on board was the world's largest mobile computer, a Univac 500. You could probably do about as much with your cell phone today, but 1965, when she was put together, it was pretty high tech. Satellites were in their infancy back then, very unreliable, so we had to get right up close to our targets in order to collect intelligence. Liberty was crammed full of intelligence. We had several linguists aboard her. They were trained in French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Liberty would cruise up and down the west coast of Africa, keeping track of what was going on. 1967, summer of 1967, war appeared to be imminent between Israel and her neighbors, called at that time the United Arab Republic, which consisted of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and to a lesser extent, Libya. Israel had told the world that they were attacked by Egypt. That was not correct. The Egyptians were all in defensive positions. Their tanks were dug in so they could get longer range with their tank guns for defensive purposes. USS Liberty was pulled off her coast of West Africa and ordered to proceed with all due haste to port of Rota, Spain, take on fuel and stores and 6 additional linguists, 3 Marines, 3 Department of Defense civilians, employees of National Security Agency and the CIA. I was a Russian linguist. I was one of those 3 Marines. The 3 civilians and the other 2 Marines were all Arabic linguists. We proceeded to the Eastern Mediterranean. We were ordered to cruise up and down international waters off the coast of Sinai, a loop pattern, keeping track of what was going on. War broke out on June the 5th. Of 1967. We arrived on station on June the 6th. Perhaps I should give you a little background here. Prior to hostilities breaking out, there was a group of 3 photo intelligence Phantom aircraft that were dispatched by the United States government from the United States to Tyrone Air Base in Germany. In Spain. When they arrived there, all of the U.S. markings were obliterated. The pilots were all given neutral uniforms and neutral identification. These American planes flew photo reconnaissance missions over all of the belligerents except Israel. Those photographs which they took were given by the Johnson administration to the Israelis. When hostilities broke out, the Israelis knew where every plane was, every tank was, all the troops were. On June 8th, we had been overflown several times by Israeli aircraft. Several times. They flew very low around us. Many of our crewmen that were off duty were sunning themselves on the decks. We waved to the pilots, and the pilots waved back. At noon on June 8th, we had a drill general quarters. Captain reminded us of a few things we needed to do that we could improve our defense of the ship should we come into a situation where general quarters needed to be declared, and went into taking care of damage control and so forth should we have been attacked. We secured from general quarters. I was off duty. I'd gone to a small store and bought some clean underwear. I had run in haste in order to catch the ship there to dock in June the 1st. I was lacking some personal stuff. I was at my rack in the tail part of the ship stamping my name into my new shirts when there was a sudden really loud noise, explosions. I dropped what I was doing. The alarm went off from general quarters, headed straight for my GQ station, which is below decks in the intelligence collection spaces. This had been a hold for cargo during World War II. It was upgraded, where we had all of our radios and recording devices, language manuals that were required for breaking codes and breaking transmissions. There were roughly 190 of us that were crammed into that space. Every time one of those Israeli ammunition pieces would strike the ship, it was like you were on the inside of a large steel drum and somebody was beating on it with a sledgehammer. That continued for a considerable period of time. We went about our business of getting all the information that we had into ditching bags so we could take all that information topside and pitch it over into the sea. Captain came on the 1MC, which was the internal public address system on the ship, and said, "Brace yourselves, torpedo attack, starboard side." Well, that's where we were. One of my buddies, Ronnie Campbell, kind of made a joke about it. He said, "Well, he hit us with everything else. What else can they hit us with?" He said, "You fellas can do what you want to. I'm going to write a letter home." Sat down to his desk, got a sheet of paper, stuck it in the mill, and he said, "Dear Eileen, you will not believe what's happening to us." The assistant division officer stuck his head in the hatchway and he said, "Sergeant Lockwood, you come here a minute, please." I stepped out into the hallway, the passageway in between. He got me into a conversation with him and the senior intelligence collection officer, Lieutenant Commander Dave Lewis. All of these ditching bags with all this classified information had to be gotten topside. They're shooting up there. That's Marine's job, get shot at. Just got me into a conversation about getting a working party together and getting those ditching bags topside, pitching them over, when there was a sudden blinding flash, terrific noise. I was knocked to the deck, semi-conscious, thinking life was over. Thought that crossed my mind was at least Lois and the kids are taken care of. I felt something cold. I looked down and water was gushing in. I heard a moan behind me. There was a sailor trapped there between what had been a temporary bulkhead of sheet metal. When the torpedo blew, that exploded like a gigantic mushroom. It caught the sailor between that collapsed bulkhead and the ladderway, which was the only way out for all these 190-some men that were down there. I got my arms under his and tried to pull him loose, and the water was rapidly rising. What had happened, I didn't find out till years later, that torpedo had literally lifted the ship out of the water and set her back down. And when she sat down, she started rolling with the sea, and that water was gushing in and out. I said to him, I said, "I can't do it by myself. You got to help me. Come on, get your feet on you and push." Well, I didn't know the reason he had been sitting down. He'd been struck by a piece of shrapnel on his left thigh from one of the rockets that had been fired at us. And it was bleeding profusely. He'd got a tourniquet, was applying that to the wound, and his left knee was raised up, and when that bulkhead struck his left knee, it literally made toothpicks out of his femur. But he got his right leg under him enough to where he could free himself. His broken leg was still tangled up in some of that wreckage. By that time, the water was almost to the overhead wheel, had about 1.5 feet of airspace. And I said, "Here, get a hold of these pipes up here." There was a lot of conduit that was holding the electrical cables and all the information from the antennas and getting it down to where our radios were. And I looked at him, I said, "Are you going to be all right?" He says, yeah, I'm okay. He's holding on to these pipes. About that time, an unconscious sailor started floating by and was headed towards the hole from the torpedo. That hole was roughly 36 by 42 feet, the size of the end of an average one-story American home. I got an arm around him, was holding him up, and of course there was a lot of confusion. Everybody was shouting, and as loudly as I could, I said, "Knock it off. If y'all don't settle down, none of us will get out of here alive." I heard a voice at the top of the ladderway. It was Lieutenant Bennett, the division officer, and he said, "Lieutenant Bennett, open this hatch." And apparently I passed out, because the next thing that I remember was I was trying to hold an unconscious sailor above water. Water was gushing in and out, and we were alone. When the torpedo struck, there was a large tank fuel oil on that part of the ship. The fuel oil that's used in Navy ships to fire the boilers is called bunker oil. It's pretty much very heavy grade, mostly waste oil. Stinks to high heavens. That oil is everywhere. I started up the ladder with this unconscious sailor and slipped and dropped him. Ship's rolling, water gushing in and out. He starts back out the hole. Went back, got him, started back up the ladder. About halfway up the ladderway, it was only about 2 feet wide to begin with, perhaps a little over 2 feet wide, but not very much. When the torpedo had blown, a piece of shrapnel had struck the railing for that real steep ladderway and bent it in. So now there's only a width of about 16 inches. And that's where the water was, top of the water was. I got him that far. Slipped on the oil, dropped him again, had to go back, get him again, get him up to the top finally, watch out for that bent place, and the hatch was sealed shut. I'm trying to hold him up with one hand, pound on the hatch with the other. And the captain had sent one of the damage control people down there. There's what we call a scuttle hole about the width of a man's shoulders in the center of this large hatchway. There was a wheel on there that you could turn and dogs would release where you could crawl out of there without opening a hatch, but that was impossible, the unconscious sailor. Someone had opened that hatch and let me out. I tried to drag this sailor out. Someone said to me, "You need to get a life vest on," and another one on him, and take him back to the mess area. This is where we prepared meals, the tables where we ate from. We had a doctor and 2 corpsmen aboard, and they were working on casualties. I tried to pick him up and put him over my shoulder and dropped him. Tried to pick him up again, dropped him again, and someone that was standing there said, "Oh, here's Buddha." He's a kind of a weightlifter, a really husky guy. Kind of embarrassed me because he picked him up, tossed him over his shoulder, trotted back there with him. It's kind of funny in a way because years later I didn't even know who he was until I think 1997 when we had a reunion in Washington. And some years after that, we were sitting in his kitchen in the suburb of Chicago, and his family was there, and I was telling what had happened to their dad. And he kind of grinned and he said, "I would have hurt Neil so bad if you would have dropped me so many times." We were told to go to the radio room, which was on the port side, the left side of the ship. There were 3 motor torpedo boats that were circling us and riddling us with heavy caliber machine gun strikes. When she was finally dry docked in Malta, Lucca, Malta, they counted 826 large caliber strikes, napalm, rockets fired, heat-seeking rockets, 40 millimeter cannon fire. There were 3,100 strikes of 30 millimeter machine gun strikes on the ship by accident, according to the Israeli version. I'm lying on the deck in the radio room, and I'm wondering, they told us they'd have aircraft to us in 10 minutes. This is already like over an hour and a half. I remember seeing some sailors carrying 3 inflatable life rafts through. And I heard this Mayday go out. The Israelis were jamming our distress frequencies, which is a violation of international law. One of our radiomen figured out when they were firing rockets at us, they could not jam our distress frequencies because that jammed up the flights of the rockets. And in that brief span, this Mayday went out. Firefox, Firefox, this is Rockstar, Rockstar. Under attack by unidentified surface and air units, require immediate assistance. That Mayday was acknowledged, and the shooting stopped. These sailors carried those life rafts through, put them over the side. There were what we call a line to hold them till we could get our wounded aboard. I heard a revving of diesel engines and more machine gun fire. A lot of machine gun fire. One of those sailors came back through the radio room and says, I don't know what we're going to do now. He said they had riddled all that we had left to get off. I don't know how true it is. I've not seen it myself, but I understand that machine gun fire had severed the line holding one of those life rafts. It was labeled U.S. Navy. One of those motor torpedo boats came in and picked up that life raft. And I understand it is on display in the Israeli Naval War Museum at Haifa, along with a ship's wheel of the torpedo that fired the fatal torpedo. The captain of that motor torpedo boat was a son of the Israeli admiral who was a commander of the Israeli Navy. And that is on display as a trophy of war. I could not understand what was going on. I just could not understand. I didn't even know who was attacking us. They were using unmarked aircraft, which is a violation of international law. One of the pilots was trained in Texas, refused to fire at us. His name was Lev Toth. Returned to base, was court-martialed and spent 5 years in Israeli prison. When he was released from Israeli prison, he came to the United States, became very friendly with a lady who was bilking some bankers. Bankers not very happy about having their money stolen from them, and Lev Toth was right in on it. Of course they got caught. Spends another 5 years in prison here in the United States. A friend of mine who was a U.S. congressman, I did not meet him until many years later, but he became a very close friend. Pete McCloskey, 16 years, U.S. congressman, Republican from the state of California. Lev Toth's girlfriend contacted Pete McCloskey, asked him to go to Springfield, Missouri, where her friend, Lev Toth, was confined in the federal medical prison in Springfield, Missouri. This was in 1986. Lev Toth told Congressman McCloskey what had happened. He said, if I am ever released from this prison, my life won't be worth anything. Congressman McCloskey sent me a copy of the dossier file that he had on Lev Toth. It's about 3/4 of an inch thick. One of the documents in that dossier was an interview that Pete McCloskey did with a former Israeli spy, Mossad, in Toronto, Canada, and told him about an assassination attempt by the Israeli Mossad against President George Herbert Walker Bush because he was not pro-Israel enough. Back to the ship. I was medevaced off to the Carrier America, spent 10 days aboard her, was transferred back to the Liberty, which was undergoing repairs in the island of Malta. There's a little interesting side to that story too. Ship did not go down. The aircraft Carrier America was sent to our aid, and 2 destroyers, USS Massey and USS Davis. They provided us with damage control, blood, medical personnel. 34 were killed. 174 were wounded. More casualties than any of them. Our medical doctor aboard the ship worked for 32 hours straight on the most severely wounded. When I got back to the ship, I had to borrow a uniform from one of the Marines aboard the Carrier America, and I was a mess. I had these fever blisters all over my face. I was less than 10 feet from the torpedo looking at it when it blew. There were 25 men killed all around me. You want to talk about survivor's guilt? I had terrible survivor's guilt. My family, my wife and 3 children were in Bremerhaven, Germany, which is my home base. When I got back to the ship, I had to stay there overnight. I had no place to sleep. The rack that had been assigned to me, they'd taken that mattress and used that to operate on. Most severely wounded, it was covered with blood, and they were just literally pitched into the sea. One of the men said, you could go up to the first aid area, and there are 3 racks up there, and just get up there and talk to Doc Van Leen. He'll take care of you. We visited for a few minutes, and talked about what had gone on, and Corpsman Van Leen said, I hope that doesn't get to stinking in the night. And I said, what's that, Doc? He pointed to a box roughly 18 inches square that was over in the corner. It was labeled unidentified human body parts. That is buried in a mass grave in Arlington National Cemetery. There were 5 in there. 2 of those were sailors that worked for me. 1 sailor, 1 Marine, and another dear friend of mine, Ronnie Campbell. When I finally got back to my home base in Bremerhaven, I couldn't get in the apartment. I'd worn the same uniform for 5 days, and I must have stunk to high heavens. We lived on the 2nd floor. The neighbor lady opened the door to her apartment, didn't have a key, couldn't get in the apartment. She said, oh, Bryce, said, my wife Lois, Lois has gone out to the base to get the mail, said, come in here, I'll get you a cup of coffee. She sat me over in a corner. One of the pieces of mail my wife had got that morning was a letter from her mother that her grandfather had passed away. My wife didn't get along just real well with her mother. Her mother was kind of a Puritan form of Baptist religion and very, very strict. But she was her grandfather's little girl. She was really close to her grandfather. She comes upstairs. Betty says, "Lois, you need to come in here a minute." There I was, a stinking mess. My wife didn't know what would happen to me. I could not tell her. My youngest daughter, she was 4 years old. "That's not my daddy." I was ordered not to talk about it. As were the rest of the crewmen. They were threatened. If you say one word to anyone in your family, any news media, anyone else, we will send you to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and forget about you. That was a United States admiral that carried that threat. Admiral Isaac Kidd. That name might ring a bell to some of you swashbuckler. Yeah, his grandfather was the famous pirate. He was ordered by the Johnson administration to conduct a 5-day inquiry into the attack on our ship. Some of you may remember the attack on the USS Cole, which is blamed on Muslims. There were 17 killed on the Cole. Congress investigated that for 9 months. Congress has never conducted an investigation into the attack on the Liberty. And that's in the congressional record. Flash forward to today. As a result of the attack on the Liberty, and nothing being done by the United States government, Israel realized they could do whatever they wanted, and the United States would do nothing. 70,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children, probably twice that many buried under the rubble. And we have done nothing.
Thank you.